The champagne glass shattered when my daughter-in-law handed me her coat. But let me back up. The morning started the way most did now. Coffee at dawn, silence filling the rooms Margaret used to occupy with her presence. I sat at the kitchen table in my gray suit, hands wrapped around the mug, looking at her photograph on the windowsill. Margaret at 40, laughing at something I'd said, wearing the simple pearl necklace I'd saved 6 months to buy her. 23 years, I said to her, smile. Still miss you every day. The house echoed. Too big for one person, but we'd raised David here, built memories in every room. Margaret had picked out the curtains, planted the garden, made this place a home, while I built Hartwell Manufacturing from a two-man machine shop into a precision parts empire worth $87 million. My phone buzzed. David's text, Gala tonight, 7 p.m. Don't forget. And Dad, please wear something nice. This is important for the company image. I looked down at my gray suit. The same one I'd worn to business meetings for 15 years. The same one Margaret said made me look distinguished. It was perfectly fine. But David had opinions now. David and his wife Vanessa, who transformed my son from a modest, hard-working operations manager into someone I barely recognized. They'd married 2 years ago, 6 months after Margaret died. Vanessa came from old money, the kind that looked down on anyone who'd actually built wealth instead of inheriting it. She wore designers I'd never heard of, drove a car that cost more than my first factory, and had opinions about everything from my furniture to my outdated management style. David had made her VP of brand strategy, a position that seemed to involve expensive lunches and even more expensive marketing campaigns that I didn't understand, but David insisted were essential for modern business. I'd stepped back from daily operations after Margaret passed. The grief had been too heavy, the silence in the office too loud without her voice on the phone during lunch breaks, without her meeting me at the door each evening wanting to hear every detail of my day. David had stepped up as CEO. I'd remained majority owner and chairman, but I'd let him lead. Maybe I'd let him lead too far. I drove myself to the Grandview Hotel in my 10-year-old Cadillac. The valet looked at it like I'd arrived in a pickup truck, but he took the keys with practiced politeness. The ballroom glittered, crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures, tables dressed in white and gold. 300 people in evening wear, celebrating Hartwell Manufacturing's 40th anniversary. 40 years. Margaret and I had started with a single lathe in a rented garage, taking on jobs no one else wanted, working 16-hour days, building a reputation for precision and reliability one part at a time. Now it was champagne fountains and string quartets. David stood near the entrance with Vanessa. My son wore a custom tuxedo that probably cost $3,000. Vanessa sparkled in a silver gown, diamonds at her throat and wrists, the kind of display Margaret would have found wasteful. Dad, David's smile was tight. You're here, said I would be. Vanessa's eyes traveled over my gray suit with unconcealed disappointment. Robert, how quaint. She air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume overwhelming. A waiter passed with champagne. I took a glass of water instead. Vanessa noticed. Not celebrating? Her tone suggested I was being difficult. Water's fine. Of course it is. She turned to greet arriving guests, investors, clients, competitors, people who mattered in her world. I drifted toward the bar, nodding to familiar faces. Longtime employees, engineers who'd been with me for decades, the people who actually built the parts that made Hartwell Manufacturing successful. They greeted me warmly, asked about my health, shared memories of Margaret. She'd have loved this, Tom Reeves said. He'd been my first hire 40 years ago. Though she'd have told you the ice sculpture was a waste of money. I smiled. She absolutely would have. How are you doing, Robert? Really? I'm here, I said. Which wasn't quite an answer, but it was true. The evening progressed with speeches. David took the stage, talking about innovation and growth, and taking Hartwell Manufacturing into the future. He mentioned me briefly, my father's legacy, in a tone that suggested the legacy was past tense, something to be honored, and then moved beyond. He didn't mention Margaret at all. During dinner, I sat at a side table while David and Vanessa held court at the head table with board members and investors. I watched my son laugh at jokes, accept congratulations, bask in attention for a company he hadn't built. After the meal, I stepped outside for air. The terrace overlooked the city, lights spreading to the horizon. Margaret and I used to take evening walks, talking about the business, about David, about the future we were building together. I pulled out my phone and looked at a message I'd received that afternoon. From Richard Chun, CEO of Precision Dynamics, our largest competitor. We'd known each other for 30 years, respected each other despite the rivalry. Robert, I heard a rumor I hope isn't true. Call me if you need to talk. Some things matter more than competition. I'd ignored it earlier. Now I read it twice. When I came back inside, Vanessa was standing near the coat check, talking loudly to a group of her society friends. I approached to pass by, not to interrupt. She turned, saw me, and her expression shifted into something practiced and dismissive. She held out her mink coat. Finally, she said, "Be a dear and hang this up properly. The help has been absolutely invisible tonight." The coat hung in the air between us. Her friends went quiet. The champagne glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the marble floor. The ballroom noise seemed to stop, though logically I knew it continued. Vanessa's friend stared. The coat still hung between us, her expectant expression slowly cracking into uncertainty. "I'm not the help," I said quietly. "I'm the owner." Vanessa's laugh was brittle. "Don't be sensitive, Robert. I just meant." "You meant exactly what you said." I looked past her to David, who'd appeared at the commotion. "Your wife just handed me her coat and called me the help. At the company I built. The company that pays for everything she's wearing." David's face flushed. "Dad, she didn't mean." "Yes, she did." I set my water glass down with careful precision. "And you let her?" I walked out through the lobby, past the glittering people, into the cool night air. My hands shook as I waited for the valet to bring the Cadillac. Not from anger, from clarity. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory, from a conversation months before she died. We'd been sitting in our kitchen, watching David and Vanessa through the window at a backyard barbecue. "She's changing him," Margaret had said. "I don't like it. He's happy. He's performing. That's different." She'd taken my hand. "Promise me something. If this company ever stops being what we built it to be, if it becomes about status instead of work, about image instead of quality, promise me you won't let that stand. We built something that mattered. Make sure it stays that way." I'd promised. Then she died, and in my grief, I'd let David take the wheel while I drifted. I'd let Vanessa's influence seep into every decision. I'd watched the company transform from a place where we made things that lasted into a showpiece for David's ambition and Vanessa's social climbing. At home, I pulled out my filing cabinet. Behind the tax returns and insurance papers was a folder I hadn't opened in years. Purchase offers. Every few years, someone approached about buying Hartwell Manufacturing. I'd always declined. Margaret and I had built this to pass to David, to keep in the family. But David didn't want the company we'd built. He wanted a trophy. Richard Chin's offer was on top, dated 6 months ago. I'd barely glanced at it then. Now I read every word. $92 million. Full acquisition. With a clause that caught my attention. Retention of current workforce with enhanced benefits. Preservation of Hartwell quality standards. And honoring of founder legacy. Richard understood what the company actually was. What it meant beyond the balance sheet. I picked up my phone and dialed. "Robert." Richard's voice was warm despite the late hour. "I hope you'd call. The offer still stand. Every word. But I need to know, what changed?" I told him about the coat. About Vanessa's words, David's transformation, the company becoming something Margaret wouldn't recognize. Richard was quiet for a moment. "I've watched David's leadership for 2 years now. Impressive numbers, terrible culture. He's getting everything you built in favor of appearances." "I know. The offer stands. But Robert, are you sure? This is your legacy." "My legacy was built with Margaret. What's there now is just her name on something she wouldn't recognize." I looked at her photograph on my desk. "I want the company to matter again. If David won't do that, someone else needs to." We talked for 2 hours. Richard would pay cash, close in 30 days, keep the Hartwell name and workforce intact. He'd restore the profit-sharing program David had eliminated, reinvest in equipment and training, focus on quality over quarterly earnings manipulation. He'd run it the way Margaret and I had intended. "One condition," Richard said. "I want you on the board. Advisory role, no day-to-day obligations, but I need your knowledge. The company should still have a Hartwell guiding it. Not David. I'm buying the company, not the CEO position. David can stay if he accepts the new direction. If not," Richard paused. "That's his choice." I agreed. We'd formalize everything in the morning. I hung up and sat in the silence. The house was too quiet, the way it had been since Margaret died. But this quiet felt different. Purposeful. My phone buzzed. David's text. We need to talk about tonight. Vanessa feels terrible. She didn't mean anything by it. I didn't respond. At 6 a.m., I met Richard and his lawyers at their office. The paperwork was ready. They'd been prepared for this call, just waiting for me to make it. I read every page, every clause. The workforce protections were ironclad. The quality standards were specified. Margaret's name would remain on the company charter, acknowledged as co-founder. I signed at 9:47 a.m. Richard shook my hand. You're doing the right thing. I'm doing what should have been done months ago. The announcement would go out at noon. David would learn the same way everyone else did. A press release to all employees and stakeholders. Hartwell Manufacturing had been acquired by Precision Dynamics. Robert Hartwell had sold his majority stake. David Hartwell's position as CEO was under review. I drove to the office, the building Margaret and I had designed, expanded 3 times over 40 years. I walked the production floor one last time as owner, shaking hands with the machinists and engineers who'd made this place run. Big news today, I told Tom Reeves. But good news for you and the crew. Things are going to change back to how they should be. At 11:58 a.m., I sat in my old office, the one I'd given to David 2 years ago, but he'd moved to a larger corner suite. My old desk was still here, pushed against a wall. Margaret's photograph sat on it, where I'd kept it for decades. At noon, the announcement hit. My phone exploded with calls. I ignored them all except one. David burst through the door at 12:14 p.m. What the hell did you do? I looked up from Margaret's photograph. I sold the company. David's face had gone white. You can't. That's not. I'm the CEO. You were the CEO. Richard Chun will make the final decision on that position. I stood, straightening my gray suit. You might want to prepare a compelling case for why you should stay. This is insane. You sold my company. It was never your company. It was mine and your mother's. We built it. We sacrificed for it. We were going to give it to you. I paused. But you turned it into something we wouldn't recognize. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her face flushed. You're doing this because of last night. Because of a simple mistake. Last night wasn't a mistake. It was clarity. I looked at my son. When did you start being ashamed of where you came from? I'm not. You eliminated the profit-sharing program your mother designed. You laid off 12 people who'd been here since the beginning so you could hire a social media team. You spend more on office renovations than on equipment upgrades. You turned a manufacturing company into a lifestyle brand. I modernized it. Profits are up 18%. Profits built on cutting wages and selling off equipment and delaying maintenance. You're strip mining everything your mother and I built for short-term gains that make you look good to investors. My voice stayed level, but each word landed like a hammer. Richard Chun will run this company the right way. Like we did. Like your mother wanted. David sank into a chair. You're really doing this. It's done. Papers signed. Money transferred. Announcement made. Vanessa's voice went sharp. You'll regret this. We'll fight it. We'll sue. On what grounds? I own 73% of the company. I can sell my stake to anyone I choose. The sale is legal, final, and frankly none of your business. I looked at her directly for the first time. You call me the help. In the company I built. At a gala celebrating 40 years of work you contributed nothing to. You treated my life's work like it was something to be embarrassed by. I apologized. No, you didn't. David texted that you felt bad. That's not the same thing. I picked up Margaret's photograph. My wife worked night shifts as a nurse to help fund this company. She kept the books, designed the profit-sharing system, interviewed every employee personally to make sure they were good people. She believed in building something that mattered, that took care of people, that meant more than status and appearances. I looked at David. She wanted to give you this company. But she also told me, right before she died, to make sure it stayed what we built it to be. I failed that for 2 years. I was grieving, and I let you change everything. That's on me. Dad, but I'm fixing it now. Richard Chun will restore the profit sharing. He'll rehire the people you let go. He'll invest in quality instead of marketing campaigns. He'll run Hartwell Manufacturing the way your mother and I always intended. Vanessa grabbed David's arm. We don't have to stay here. You're talented. We'll start our own company. With what money? I asked. The company David just lost was his primary asset. His salary is under review, and his reputation as the CEO, who got bought out by the competition, won't help with investors. David's head was in his hands. You've destroyed me. No, I've given you a chance to remember who you are. Richard is willing to keep you on if you accept the new direction. If you can run the company the right way, with the right values, focusing on the work instead of the image. I moved toward the door. But that's your choice. Stay and do it right, or leave and try to build something new. Either way, you'll have to do it without treating people like they're beneath you. I walked out of the office, through the production floor one last time. The employees had heard the news. Some looked worried. I stopped to talk to them. Richard Chuen is a good man, I told the gathered crowd. He'll take care of you better than I've been doing lately. He'll bring back the programs we used to have. He'll invest in this place. You're in good hands. Tom Reeves shook my hand. What about you, Robert? I'm going to do what I should have done when Margaret died. Rest. Grieve properly. Stop trying to fill the silence with work. I smiled. And make sure this place stays what it's supposed to be. Richard wants me on the board. Advisory role. I'll be around. Over the next month, the transition happened smoothly. Richard kept his word on everything. The profit sharing was restored within 2 weeks. The laid-off employees were rehired with back pay and apologies. Investment in equipment and training began immediately. David stayed on as operations manager, not CEO, but a position that let him use his actual skills in manufacturing rather than playing executive. Vanessa left him 3 weeks into the transition. She'd married the CEO of Hartwell Manufacturing, not an operations manager at a company owned by someone else. The divorce was quick and expensive. David came to my house on a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the sale. He looked smaller somehow. Tired. Can we talk? He asked. We sat in the kitchen where he'd grown up. I made coffee the way Margaret used to. I'm sorry, he said. For all of it. For letting Vanessa change me. For being embarrassed by the company you and Mom built. For treating you like you were in the way. Why did you let it happen? He was quiet for a long time. When Mom died, I thought I had to be someone different. Someone bigger. Like if I could make the company impressive enough, successful enough, it would mean her death hadn't stopped everything. He stared into his coffee. Vanessa made me feel like I was sophisticated. Important. Like I'd moved beyond the machine shop origins. Your mother was never ashamed of the machine shop. She was proud of it. I know. I forgot that. His voice cracked. I forgot a lot of things. We sat in silence. Outside, the garden Margaret had planted was overgrown. I'd been meaning to tend it, but hadn't found the energy. I'll help you with the garden, David said, following my gaze. If you want. Mom would hate seeing it like this. We worked in the garden that afternoon, pulling weeds, trimming bushes, restoring the space Margaret had left. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The company thrived under Richard's leadership. 18 months after the sale, profits were up 22%, real profits, built on efficiency and quality, not accounting tricks. Employee retention hit a 10-year high. Orders increased as clients noticed the return to Hartwell's original standards. David proved himself in his new role. He learned to value the work over the title. He started having lunch with the machinists, learning from the veterans the way I had 40 years ago. Richard noticed and eventually promoted him back to VP of Operations, a position he actually deserved. I attended board meetings quarterly, offering advice when asked, staying quiet otherwise. I visited the production floor weekly, talking to employees, staying connected to the work. But mostly, I focused on the things I'd neglected. The garden, the house, the memories. I set up Margaret's craft room the way she'd kept it, preserved as a reminder of the woman who'd believed in every crazy dream, every impossible risk. I started a foundation in her name, funding nursing scholarships and supporting small manufacturing startups, helping people the way we'd wished someone had helped us. 2 years after the sale, I sat in my kitchen at dawn with coffee and Margaret's photograph. I think you'd approve, I told her, smile. The company's back to what we built. David's becoming the man you raised. The work matters again. The silence in the house was still there. It would always be there. But it felt less empty now, fuller with purpose and peace and the knowledge that I'd kept my promise to her. Some mornings, David joined me for coffee before work. We'd talk about the company, about Margaret, about the future. He was rebuilding himself, and I was letting him, with guidance, but also with space to find his own way. Think Mom would be proud? He asked one morning. I think she'd say you still have work to do, I said. But yes, she'd be proud you're doing it. The company continued without my name in the executive suite, but with my values in its foundation. The Hartwell name meant quality again, meant taking care of people, meant building things that lasted. And in the quiet mornings, sitting with Margaret's photograph and calloused hands wrapped around a warm mug, I knew we'd built something that survived. Not because it stayed in the family, but because someone was willing to fight to keep it true to what it was meant to be. That was legacy, not ownership, not blood, but values that outlasted ego and grief and the mistakes of a son who had lost his way. David found his way back. The company thrived. Margaret's memory lived in the work, in the foundation, in the garden we'd restored together. And I learned that sometimes letting go was the only way to save what mattered most. The morning light caught the edge of Margaret's photograph. She was smiling, and I smiled back. We did good, I told her. And in the silence of our kitchen, I could almost hear her agree.